and it's you know, we were talking about this earlier, it's a very daunting thing, as all of you know who are in SCAD, or whether you've just left home yourself. It's kind of, I think, more than actually physically leaving home, it's the realisation when you do leave home that you can't go back, you can never kind of go back to how things were, and you sort of just have to adapt to that. And so I was in that stage where I was still adapting. And to go home in the middle of that kind of process and make a film about home and about homesickness was overwhelming, you know.
And we owe it to your parents for having come to America in the first place, for the fact that you are an actress, because it was actually one of these crazy stories that your father himself was not seeking a career in acting, but wound up in one, which maybe you can talk a little. It's an interesting story.
Yeah, they went over in the 80s. There was no work at home. It was a really bad recession in Ireland, and you know, they both left school when they were about 16. Didn't have any degrees or anything like that. Not that that really would have helped. And they went over there, and my mum kind of, she did cleaning jobs and things like that to begin with, kind of jobs that were a bit, you know, she worked for people who were a bit kind of degrading, and she did what she had to do to make a bit of money. And my dad worked in construction, and I said to Scott earlier, there was a job that he had where he was at the Waldorf Astoria at the hotel in New York, and a sewage pipe broke, and it, like, everything went everywhere. And he was literally in an elevator shaft in the Waldorf Astoria, one of the fanciest hotels in New York, shoveling shite into a wheelbarrow. And so they did all these different jobs, and they worked. You know, they were there for 10 years, and they worked, and that's what they did. And eventually he became a bartender and was very good at it and very charismatic and funny. He was always kind of a jokester. And these Irish actors from the Irish Rep and the Irish Arts Centre would go into him after a performance at night time. And one of them, Chris O'Neill, noticed something in this man, and eventually persuaded him to audition for a Hugh Leonard play called Da. And Dad thought he was mental, but eventually was persuaded by Mam and Chris to go up for the role, and he got it, and he became an actor, and was never a normal person again. Because no actor is normal. Yeah, and so that's how it started. And so then they went home when I was about 3, and my mum was adamant about, you know, me being born over here, because they were illegal here for 3 years, and you know, they got on the plane in Dublin and couldn't go home, and didn't know how long they'd be away for, you know. So it was a big sacrifice to make the trip that they did.
And so you're back in Ireland at 3, and not long after that you were acting. And was this, do you remember when you first displayed an interest, or just an innate ability? I don't know how it began for you. How would you say it first emerged that you were an actress?
I don't know, I mean, it was never something that I thought about. I wasn't, you know, I always find it a bit mad when some people say, from the age of 1, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't one of those kids, but I was an only child, I am an only child, and so I think my imagination was kind of what I depended on to, you know, entertain myself. And I grew up in the countryside, and so, you know, everyone lived miles away, and my imagination to this day, and I hope that, I'm sure it will always be that way, is something that kind of keeps me sane a little bit. And I think my dad probably saw that in me. He used to record me all the time, as parents do, and saw that I was very kind of drawn towards the camera and felt very comfortable with the camera. And so his agent was, she had this role in mind. There was a film that was being cast in Ireland with Michael Caine, and she put me up for it, and I didn't get it. I didn't get it. Fine, I'm over it now. It's fine. I've got an evening dedicated to me now. It's fine. Michael Caine. Haven't seen Michael since. But anyway, I didn't get that wrong. But then I got a job in this little Irish show called The Clinic, and it just felt very, very natural natural for me to be on set, you know, and I did another series of that, and then I did another show, and then I got into film.
So that first film was a movie with Michelle Pfeiffer. Probably on a larger scale than you've ever experienced. You're asked as your character to talk about and go through some pretty crazy stuff. What was the whole experience like in the first movie set?
Well, I have to say, to start on an Amy Heckerling film was a real eye-opener, because the subject matter usually in Amy's films are pretty out there, and my mum and dad had to sit down with me a few times and go through the facts of life, probably sooner than they would have done if I hadn't been doing I Could Never. But it was brilliant. I mean, it was, again, I felt very at home on a film set, and maybe because it was a kid, maybe because of my mum, probably it was because of my mum. I wasn't really fazed by the fact that there were big names around me or anything, but there were lovely people. I mean, Paul Rudd was really great on that job, and he really looked after me, and then from there I did another thing, and then the dialect coach from I Could Never. And this is the thing, is that unfortunately it isn't just down to kind of whether you're good or not, but you need people around you who kind of believe in you and who'll put your name forward or mention you to someone or whatever. And I was very lucky that the dialect coach from I Could Never Be a Woman mentioned me to Joe Wright, who directed Atonement, because I was completely wrong for that role. Like, I was, the description of Bryony Tallis is not a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pale Irish girl. And I was very lucky, especially in those early days, that I had people around me who I just clicked with, and they mentioned me to other people. Yeah.
You were so good in that movie. I think if it's been, I guess now 8 years, and if you haven't seen it, or if you need to refresh, you should go see it, because it's one of the great child performances ever, and I think that it was rightly recognized with Best Supporting Actress Oscar nomination. It's a movie that was nominated for Best Picture. It really kind of blew you up, and I just wondered, were you able to process all of the positive feedback, or were you already on to the next thing?
I mean, it was great, but I was kind of on to the next thing, Again, I think when you're that age, and it probably is better to be this way, it kind of did, I guess, go over my head a little bit, Like, I remember when we premiered the film at the Venice Film Festival, and I was working on something else at the time, and went in for it, and that was like my first premiere ever, was opening. I think we opened the Venice Film Festival, and I remember Joe, the director, being so nervous, because this was his film, and all the board of the Venice Film Festival were there, and like the mayor of Venice or whatever, and he was so nervous, and I looked at him and I was like, what's wrong with you? You're grand, I love it, it'll be great, it'll be fine. And it don't, when you're a kid, there's that innocence there, and it's great that all of this kind of goes over your head a little bit. So more than anything, I was just kind of excited that I was going to be on a show that I had watched on the telly for so many years. To me, that's what the Oscars was. But by that stage, by the time it actually happened, I was on to Lovely Bones, and the day after the Oscars happened, Mum and Dad and I flew back to New Zealand, and I was doing, The Murder Scene with Stanley the next day. So I was very much straight back into work, which, I wouldn't have had it any other way, really.
And that was a much bigger project than you've been a part of up to that point, right? I mean, this is, and it's dark, not that Atonement isn't dark, but to have basically be playing a murdered girl.
Light stuff.
Yeah, light stuff. How did you at such a young age approach material generally, whether it's that or, I mean, a lot of your movies throughout your career have been fairly dark. Hannah's not child's play either. So, how were you weren't in a normal, like, school environment, right? You weren't, I think you have wonderful parents from everything I've heard. Was that really just reviewing the material with them? Is that how you prepared yourself?
For Lovely Bones?
Oh, generally, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my mum and dad were great because they really kind of respected my kind of good instinct, and they knew that if I was very drawn to something, that it do. But Lovely Bones was kind of the first and only time when I was a kid where they wouldn't have let me do it if it was going to be graphic or explicit or anything like that. And my mum was very, very aware of that when I was growing up, because it's very easy to, if you're a kid on a set, and especially if you're a young girl, to be taken advantage of, and for things to kind of get out of hand or go a step too far with certain scenes or whatever it is. And that's why it was so amazing to have her around always, And so with Lovely Bones, they, of course, they wanted to know how the rape scene was going to be handled. And Pete Jackson and Fran, their parents themselves, and that was never a direction they wanted to go in, I don't think. So as soon as they knew that, they were fine. But it's funny because, I'm sure you guys find as well that when you do work that's quite serious or full of drama, you need to balance it with humour and have fun and have the crack, as we say on. And that's what we did on Lovely Bones for 9 months. Like, it was, we had long days and all the rest of it, but it was brilliant. Like, we had so much fun. I couldn't have picked a better murderer than Steve. I couldn't have asked for a better serial killer to share my scenes with.
So, over the years, obviously, Torment, drama, Lovely Bones, very dramatic.